Hello and welcome to Indus News Live from Islamabad. I'm Hira Mustafa and these are the headlines. Turkey says it is seeking a new mission in Afghanistan with Pakistan and Hungary's involvement after the US-led forces leave. President Tayyip Erdogan proposed this while talking to reporters after the NATO summit in Brussels. Erdogan said Ankara will need Washington's diplomatic, logistic and financial support if it is to maintain troops in Afghanistan. Beijing has urged the NATO to stop exaggerating the China threat theory. In a statement, China's mission to the European Union said the alliance is misjudging the international situation. It said NATO is slandering China's peaceful development, which indicates a Cold War mentality. This comes after the group's leaders warned that China presents systemic challenges. In Japan, the opposition parties have submitted a no-confidence motion against Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga. They criticized the government's COVID-19 response and plans to push ahead with the Tokyo Olympics. This comes after the ruling coalition rejected the opposition's demand to extend the current parliamentary session. Deaths from COVID-19 in the U.S. have crossed 600,000 with nearly 33.5 million infections. Pakistan has reported less than 1,000 cases after almost a month, with 59 fatalities overnight. Globally, the new coronavirus has claimed 3.8 million lives and infected more than 176 million people. Well, those were the headlines. News in detail coming after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Now the news in detail. Turkey says it is seeking a new mission in Afghanistan with Pakistan and Hungary's involvement after the US-led forces leave. President Tayyip Erdogan proposed this while talking to reporters after the NATO summit in Brussels. Erdogan said Ankara will need Washington's diplomatic, logistic and financial support if it is to maintain troops in Afghanistan. Turkey currently has some 500 soldiers in the country. The Turkish president termed his first face-to-face meeting with US President Joe Biden constructive. Erdogan said there are no unsolvable problems between the two countries, despite no progress on the S-400 issue. Meanwhile, the US president also dubbed talks with his Turkish counterpart as productive.
I just finished meeting with President Erdogan of Turkey. We had a positive and productive meeting, much of it one-on-one. We had detailed discussions about how to proceed on a number of issues. Our two countries have big agendas. Our teams are going to continue our discussions, and I'm confident we'll make real progress with Turkey and the United States.
Beijing has urged NATO to stop exaggerating the China threat theory. In a statement, China's mission to the European Union said the alliance is misjudging the international situation. It said NATO is slandering China's peaceful development, which indicates a Cold War mentality. Beijing warned that if it will not remain indifferent in the face of a systemic challenge. This comes after the group's leaders warned that China poses a threat to the security of the alliance. Speaking after a summit in Brussels, NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg said the alliance sought to counter China. The U.S. Navy says an aircraft carrier group led by the USS Ronald Reagan has entered the South China Sea. China frequently objects to U.S. military missions in the region, saying they do not help promote peace or stability. The Navy said the routine mission includes guided missile cruiser USS Shiloh and destroyer USS Halsey. It said the strike group is conducting maritime security operations in the sea. These include flight operations, maritime strike exercises, and coordinated tactical training between surface and air units. This coincides with rising tensions between Washington and Beijing, escalated by the G7 and NATO summits. In Japan, the opposition parties have submitted a no-confidence motion against Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga. The development comes after the ruling coalition rejected the opposition's demand to extend the current parliamentary session. Constitutional Democratic Party chief said the Suga government has not been able to protect the lives and livelihoods. The opposition parties criticized the government's COVID-19 response and plans to push ahead with the Tokyo Olympics. However, the ruling coalition is set to reject the motion in the plenary session of the House of Representatives. If the vote is passed, the Prime Minister has 10 days to dissolve the lower house or have the entire cabinet step down. Suga previously suggested he would dissolve the lower house for a snap election should such a motion be submitted. Japan has condemned South Korea's military drills around a set of disputed islands, demanding immediate cancellation. Tokyo and Seoul have been at odds over the sovereignty of the islets in the Sea of Japan. Chief Cabinet Secretary Katsunobu Kato called the islands Japan's territory under international law. At a news conference, Kato termed the training exercise unacceptable and extremely regrettable. He also denied reports that South Korean President Moon Jae-in is arranging a visit to Japan timed to the Tokyo Olympics. Meanwhile, Seoul's defense ministry says naval, air and coast guard forces are joining the drills being staged mostly on the sea. The drills around the islets have taken place twice a year since 1986, prompting frequent protests from Japan. Palestinian factions have called for a day of rage as far-right Israeli groups prepare to march in East Jerusalem. Hamas has warned Israel of renewed hostilities if the procession goes ahead. Palestine's Prime Minister Mohammed Shataya has called for stopping the march. He said it is a provocation against Palestinians in Jerusalem. Shataya also warned the occupying forces of dangerous repercussions over the flag march. Moreover, Israel's defense forces will stand by in case of a surge in violence during the procession. It risks reigniting tensions in Gaza and rekindling violence between Israel and Hamas. Deaths from COVID-19 in the U.S. have crossed 600,000 with nearly 33.5 million cases. Globally, the new coronavirus has claimed 3.8 million lives and infected more than 176 million people. More in this report. Although COVID-19 vaccination graphs around the world bring hopes of normalcy, the number of cases shows little signs of retreating. Chile says it will extend a COVID-19 emergency through September to allow the government to impose restrictions. Cases have soared in the country to some of their highest levels since the pandemic began, despite 61% of citizens receiving at least one vaccine dose and 48% being fully vaccinated. Brazil has extended the validity of the single-shot Johnson & Johnson vaccine, prolonging its shelf life from 3 months to 4.5. Meanwhile, as the U.S. emerges from lockdowns, the grim milestone of 600,000 deaths is a painful reminder.
It's just very sad, and it's very hard to know that I'm coming on a year. But I do feel that he made such a strong impact on all of our lives that he's still with us.
Over in Europe, hundreds of protesters gathered around London's Parliament Square against the delay in further easing of restrictions. British Health Minister Matt Hancock says the government took the decision with a heavy heart, following concerns about a rapid rise in Delta variant infections, first discovered in India.
The Delta variant now accounts for over 90% of cases across the country. We know the Delta variant spreads more easily, and there's evidence that the risk of hospitalization is higher than for the previously dominant Alpha variant. Mr. Speaker, case numbers are rising, up 64% on last week in England.
India has reported more than 2,700 deaths and over 60,000 new infections in the past 24 hours, the lowest cases since March 31st. Meanwhile, Japan will send 1 million COVID-19 vaccine doses to Vietnam. Tokyo says it also plans to send doses to Indonesia, Malaysia, the Philippines and Thailand next month. Pakistan has reported 59 deaths from coronavirus in the past 24 hours. The health ministry says the tally of fatalities is approaching 21,800. Less than 1,000 people tested positive for the virus overnight, the lowest in the third wave of the pandemic. It has taken the positivity rate to 2.39%. Pakistan has reported more than 942,000 cases since the pandemic began, with over 878,000 recoveries. There are nearly 41,000 active cases in the country and 2,600 are critical. Pakistan has reiterated its call for justice in the assassination case of a prominent Kashmiri journalist, Shujat Bukhari. He was shot dead by unidentified gunmen near his office in Srinagar 3 years ago. Pakistan's Foreign Office said the perpetrators are at large and the family of the victim is still awaiting justice. It said Islamabad honors the courage of Kashmiri journalists braving harassment by the occupation forces. Islamabad urged the international community to take notice of grave human rights violations in occupied Kashmir. It also called on India to immediately restore the valley's autonomy. The UN says it is preparing for a likely displacement of more Afghan civilians following the withdrawal of US and allied forces. In an interview, UN Refugee Chief Filippo Grandi said violence has been resurfacing in Afghanistan. Grandi warned the situation is likely to become worse with the withdrawal of international troops. He noted that strong international support is needed for peace talks between Kabul and the Taliban. Meanwhile, UN aid chief Mark Lowcock said international focus on Afghanistan has weakened lately. He said he had productive discussions with the Biden administration on maximizing aid. The UN appealed for $1.3 billion in funding for 2021 and has only received about 23% of that. According to UN, some 18.4 million people in Afghanistan need humanitarian assistance. Meanwhile, in Myanmar, demonstrators are staging a sit-in against the military regime in the Maing township of Mangwe region. Many marched in Mandalay City, Sagaing and Tanintharyi region, calling for a boycott of military-linked products. In Kachin states, Pakint people took to the streets vying to root out the military regime. The dissent continues even though the military has killed 863 civilians and arrested over 6,000 since the coup. This comes a day after ousted leader Aung San Suu Kyi went on trial for 3 cases in Naypyidaw. They were linked to the illegal possession of walkie-talkie radios and breaching coronavirus regulations. The outgoing UN aid chief has slammed the G7 for failing to come up with a plan to vaccinate the world against COVID-19. In an interview, Mark Lowcock said the group's pledge to provide 1 billion doses over the next year is a small step. Lowcock said the supply will vaccinate about 10% of the population of low and middle-income countries. He said such sporadic and small-scale handouts from rich countries to poor countries are not a serious plan. He added the group of wealthy nations essentially completely failed to show the necessary urgency to end the pandemic. He said the G7 could also have done a lot more to provide vital supplies such as oxygen, ventilators. The U.S. Southwest is bracing for a brutal heat wave expected to move into California this week. The hot spell is already punishing some parts of the territory. Meteorologists say a high-pressure ridge is responsible for the unusually blistering heat this early in the year. The National Weather Service has issued an excessive heat warning for southwest Arizona, including Phoenix. It has predicted dangerously hot conditions and warned of health and fire dangers. Meanwhile, California's temperature is likely to spike over 100 degrees Fahrenheit for several days. Wildfires scorched more than 17,000 square kilometers of land in California in 2020. More news stories coming up after the short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Asia Pacific stocks are trading mixed as indecision mars investors who await the latest U.S. Federal Reserve policy decision. Japan's Nikkei 225 is leading the gains, jumping over 1%. Australia's ASX 200 has also nearly ascended to the 1% mark. Seoul's Kospi has edged up as well. However, stocks in mainland China and Hong Kong's Hang Seng have slipped over 0.5%. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at indus.news.